They put tons of wild donkeys in the desert, and what happened years later terrified everyone. Settlers brought donkeys into Australia's vast desert, which is one of the most fragile landscapes on Earth, to solve a transportation problem in the 1800s. Horses and oxen struggled in the heat, and camels were not yet widely available, and as a result, donkeys proved ideal. They needed little water, survived on poor vegetation, and could carry heavy loads for long distances. As inland stations and mining towns expanded, so did donkey numbers. They hauled supplies, water, and equipment deep into the desert and soon became essential to survival. However, the problem started when their usefulness ended. As railways and motor vehicles replaced animal transport in the early 1900s, donkeys were no longer needed. Many were released instead of being cared for. Others were abandoned when mines closed or stations downsized. Some also escaped. With no management and few natural predators, these donkeys moved into the wild and began spreading. Soon, the donkeys formed herds and moved to remote regions of Western Australia, the Kimberley, the Pilbara, and the Northern Territory. Their ability to travel long distances without water allowed them to colonize areas native animals struggled to reach. Unlike sheep or cattle, they did not depend on humans. They moved freely, feeding as they went, and their numbers steadily increased. But it wasn't until decades later that the real damage became clear. Donkeys placed intense pressure on desert ecosystems that already stretched thin. They grazed heavily on native grasses and shrubs, many of which evolved to survive limited feeding. And this was not light grazing, as the large herds stripped vegetation faster than it could regrow and left bare ground behind. Native species were soon forced to compete for shrinking food supplies, especially during dry seasons. Water holes suffered even more. In arid Australia, permanent water sources are rare and vital. Yet the donkeys crowded these areas in large numbers, trampling the edges and muddying the water. This made smaller native animals avoid these sites once they became overrun. Over time, repeated trampling caused erosion and damaged soils that took decades to form. And not long after, infrastructure damage followed. Donkeys broke fences while searching for food or water. They damaged troughs and tanks by crowding around them. And for pastoralists already dealing with harsh conditions, this added constant repair costs. Aside from these damages, the presence of unmanaged herds also raised disease concerns, as feral donkeys could carry parasites that were difficult to monitor or control. By 1949, the situation had escalated enough for Western Australia to officially declare wild donkeys a pest. Their numbers had reached the hundreds of thousands, and scientists warned that entire habitats were being altered. Some regions also faced permanent changes as native plants disappeared faster than they could recover. So shortly after, control efforts followed. Early attempts were local and limited, which included ground shooting and trapping near waterholes. These methods only removed small numbers but failed to slow overall growth because the donkeys simply moved elsewhere. This prompted larger programs to be introduced, such as aerial shooting from helicopters. While the approach allowed access to remote areas and reduced numbers more effectively, it was costly and difficult to maintain. However, one of the most effective strategies was the Judas donkey method. It entails fitting a captured donkey with a tracking collar and then releasing it. And since donkeys are social, it would lead trackers to entire herds. This allowed large groups to be located and removed at once. The method significantly reduced populations in some regions and became a model for managing other invasive species. But despite the breakthrough with this method, complete removal proved impossible. You see, Australia's size and terrain allowed donkeys to persist in hard-to-reach areas. So when control efforts slowed due to funding or logistics, populations rebounded quickly. The attack on land and water resumed, forcing authorities into ongoing management rather than elimination. As a result, Australia's desert still bears the marks of the donkey invasion, and managing its impact remains a constant battle.